Hello, my name is Roma Fisiha and I'm 17 years old and I live in Islington. Today is the 5th of February, which is National Voter Registration Day, and I'm here in Hampstead and Kilburn with...
Farhan. I live here in South Kilburn, which is kind of one of the poorer areas in the borough and actually in the top 5% of most deprived wards in the UK. I work as a researcher around here and around Kilburn in general, looking at kind of what makes community tick.
And so Farhan, why are we having this conversation? Why are you so bothered about people voting and registering to vote?
Because I think, Roma, there's a lot of people my age and your age and everywhere in between who really don't feel like taking part in the political process is for them. And I get that, right? So like the first time I could vote in a national election, that was when I was back in Canada. And I just turned 18, I sort of stared at the candidates and stared at the candidates and stared at the candidates and ended up not voting because I couldn't make up my mind, but I couldn't make up my mind because every option felt bad. So I totally get that, and I think a lot of people have an even stronger sense of that than I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when you have a whole generation who kind of goes, politics is broken, so therefore we're not going to take part, that only allows it to become more broken. And the fact of the matter is, we don't really have any power at the moment as a generation, that, you know, we're inheriting a world that's been built for us, and if we're going to fight against the way that world is built, then we need to start pushing in the ways that we can push. And I think voting is a huge way to do that.
And so why is it that people feel like these candidates aren't representing themselves, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's different issues, right? So, like, you look at the Scottish referendum, and there was a lot of controversy about how much of that vote was decided by people over 50 trying to protect their pensions, right? And some of that was exaggerated by the media, but some of that was also true, right? So there's a sense that conventionally politics is an older person's game, mm-hmm. and that politicians will pander to older people. The promises that they make, you know, if they offer pensioners free heating throughout the winter, they can offer, you know, they can also get away with cutting support for young mothers. You know, it's kind of give with one, take from the other, but it's take from one group and give to the other. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people recognize that like most of the policies out there don't really offer anything they feel is going to support or empower them at the moment.
But maybe that's because there's not as many people that are young that are voting, and so politicians would rather aim their policies at people that they know will vote them in, mm-hmm. rather than those that won't vote.
Well, so I think you're right? Like, I think voting is about taking ownership of the process. So where I'm from in Canada, the Conservative Party have been in power for almost the past 35 years unbroken. And I, not to disclose who I do vote for, but I'm not a Conservative voter. But I'm a member of the Conservative Party in my region. And the Canadian system works like the American, where you vote in provincial elections as well as the national one. I'm a member of the Conservative Party because if they're going to win, I want them to be accountable to me. If they're going to hold that office, I want them to say, well, this guy and his concerns are relevant to who I am. He has a share of ownership in the party. And if we don't listen to people like him, then there's going to be problems for us down the line. And so being able to claim that ownership, I think, is the first step towards making change. And it isn't just me. So in my province, you have a lot of young people who've taken a similar approach, because there are threats to the Conservatives from parties even further to the right, and they've realized for their part that if they want to hold on to power, they need to now start appealing a little bit more moderately, maybe even a little bit more towards the left, because there are young people like us who are disillusioned with everything that's going on, but still have a share of that ownership, still have a share as to what could happen, who gets to hold the power.
Just to confirm, even though there's our Canadian parties, that we are non-partisan as the forum, mm-hmm. But Farhan, how do you think we can maybe tackle these issues?
So I think when people say young people aren't interested in politics, they're getting it half wrong, right? It's like there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of frustration. I think the trick is to speak to that rather than against that, mm-hmm. and say, you know, in an ideal world, you'd have your own better ways of changing the way things are. But at the moment, this is the system. It does tend to mostly belong to people who are powerful and who maybe aren't you and who maybe don't share your interests. But it's your best bet for actually getting something done. And so speaking to that anger and saying, well, vote angry. Mm-hmm. Speaking to that frustration and say, well, vote frustrated. And don't just leave it at that. You know, I think part of the reason why people are cynical about voting is because it's seen as this one-off action. That's how you influence the political process. And then people look at, 5 years down the line and go, well, they didn't do anything they promised for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we don't live in a system where voting is enough anymore, maybe.
So maybe we should ask ourselves, what can we do about it if they didn't implement the policies that they promised?
But then I think it's also, good to be honest and say to people, well, voting isn't enough, but you need to do it as a step.
Okay. And why are you so interested in politics? I mean, a lot of young people aren't.
I was quite lucky. I think there's a personal story behind this, which is I grew up in sort of a big immigrant family where when I was born, we were just sort of making it by, and we had 9 people in the household and everyone was supporting each other. And over time we started doing better, but it sort of gave me this understanding that, what happens in your life is never just dependent on who you are or what you do. You always sort of need those around you, not just, your family, but you're also a product of your circumstances. And the more and more I kind of came to understand that, the more and more it frustrated me that in some ways I'd gotten to be quite lucky and others hadn't. Yeah. That circumstances aren't even across the country or across the globe, no matter where you are. And I think to me that's what politics is about, right? It's about how can you distribute those circumstances and what's the fairest way. And everybody has their own ideas on that. But I think anyone who has, a strong sense of who they are, a strong sense of identity, in part, that is a product of their environment, and in part, they're beholden to that. They're obligated, right? And so, to me, that's what politics is, and that's why it's interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Farhan. And don't forget, everybody, the deadline to register to vote is April 20th.
Happy National Voter Registration Day! Woo!